Waverly, Tennessee, two derailed tank cars filled with propane exploded this afternoon. Casualties were heavy.
At 10:30 p.m. on Wednesday, February 22nd, 1978, an L&N train jumped the tracks, derailing one-third of its cars in a small town in Tennessee. Billy D. McMurtry was the deputy fire chief of Waverly at the time of the accident.
Now there was 22, 25 cars stacked up in a distance down the railroad track of 200 feet. They looked like pickup sticks. 5 of the cars that derailed were loaded. There was 2 loaded with cross ties. There was 1 boxcar loaded with newsprint. Underneath all of this was the 2 propane tank cars.
The derailment occurred in the heart of town, near a busy vehicle crossing. Buddy Frazier and his brother were the officers on duty that night.
And we were the first 2 officers on the scene of the derailment. We had no idea amidst the wreckage that there were 2 rail cars of propane under this massive tangled rail cars. And we drove the patrol car in just as close as we could get before we got out of the car. I was not prepared at all. No preparation at all. I think what I had to do was rely on other people's knowledge and resources and what their best advice at the time was.
This advice turned out to have devastating consequences. The railroad cleanup crew assured everyone that the situation wasn't dangerous. They claimed that the tank wouldn't explode because it was double-walled and heavily insulated.
Well, they first argued that the tank that blevied was not damaged enough to be any threat at all. It had 2 creases about 3 inches apart that transcended 30 feet along the side and bottom of this tank car.
And I think the fire chief was pretty well looking after the fire department functions, the police chief looking after the police functions, state civil defense doing their particular thing, railroad officials doing theirs, and I don't think there was a lot of good communication right up front.
It wasn't clear who was in charge during the cleanup. No single official took command, and actions taken by the police department and fire department were either overruled or disregarded.
Since we were a volunteer fire department, that rinky-dink fire department doesn't know what it's doing, the orders came down to bring the perimeter in.
We all got safe and comfortable because we'd been around that for 2 days and nothing happened.
But events were happening that would lead to tragic results. After initially being evacuated, citizens were allowed to return to their homes. Businesses were reopened. Utilities that had been shut off were turned back on. Train traffic was permitted to pass through town. Gasoline was even delivered less than a block away. And on top of that, the weather began to change.
We had on Wednesday night, the temperature was down about 15 degrees. On Thursday night, it was down to about 18 degrees, but Friday morning, the sun came out bright, and before I left the house, my wife said, "Oh, isn't it a beautiful day?" And I said, "The good Lord's not smiling on us." She said, "Why is that?" I said, "Because I'm afraid that the sun on that, the heat, it'll blow before the day's over."
Unfortunately, that hunch was right. The changing temperature caused the damaged tank car to begin to crack open. Compressed propane sprayed out, immediately expanding to 250 times its size. Within seconds, the gas ignited, and flame flashed back to the leaking tank. A tremendous explosion mushroomed skyward as a 1,700-degree fireball ignited everything in its path. Fire and debris rained down as much as a quarter mile away. This catastrophe exacted a terrible human cost.
I was right beside an automobile, but I didn't have a chance to get in front of it, so I just dove for the ground.
I was the first unit to get back into the area over there. And when I did get back in, the police chief was one of the first people that I found. He was walking toward me. His clothing was in shreds. His burns were very severe.
That I remember as I hear somebody shouting, "Help me. My God, help me." I looked up. I didn't know whether I was dead or alive, really. I looked up, and This person, and I have no idea who it was, that was completely black all over, was running between me and this beer joint. And every time his foot hit the ground, he would holler. And there were flames coming out from his back, his clothing, body, 6 to 8 inches. And it was unreal.
I discovered a person that had been a deputy sheriff. He was working at that time for a lumber company. And I didn't know who he was till I got to the emergency room and I started to take him out of the car, and he told me he couldn't see. And I recognized him by his voice when he spoke those words to me. And he did not survive.
I had to put men in jeopardy of their lives, of which one of them lost their life and one was badly burned in that incident there. And until you have done that and lived through that, you can't imagine what it does to you.
The Waverly tragedy left 16 people dead, including the fire chief and the chief of police. More than 100 people were injured, and those injuries left pain and scars that years later still remain.
I felt like if any harm ever came to me, I hear it would come by a bad guy or whatever. I may get shot, I may get stabbed, or something of that nature. I never thought about a rail disaster being a threat to myself or my life or of my friends or fellow officers.
Until you know what you have, don't go near it. It can be a fatal mistake.
The Department of Transportation has created guidelines for the identification and handling of hazardous materials. And the tragedy at Waverly prompted the federal government to establish procedures for handling hazardous materials incidents. Always be sure to follow these guidelines and procedures. Don't learn the lessons of Waverly the hard way.